I'm here with our psychologist, Emily Allison, who is the author of all of our children's work and behaviour change work within my CWA. Emily has a wealth of experience of working to change behaviours, working with violent behaviours and working around domestic abuse. We're going to talk about some of the pressures that families are under at this pandemic, during this pandemic, where they are in lockdown and where they're, for some families it must feel like they're in a real pressure cooker. So Emily, how do you think the COVID-19 crisis is impacting families on lockdown, especially those that are experiencing any form of domestic abuse? And do you have any advice?
In the current crisis, which is really, such an unprecedented situation for anyone to have to deal with, it can be really, really difficult to try and restrict your children from going out. And they may be struggling to cope as well with, being stuck at home and not being able to go about their normal routines, which, all of us are experiencing those challenges. So I think one of the things for us at CWA we've been thinking about a lot is helping parents manage those difficult conversations with their teenagers or with their children about the current situation and why obeying the rules matters so much at this difficult time.
There's a lot on social media as well, lots of photographs that have been taken of teenagers who are meeting, lots of judgment of parents, really, where they've maybe not been able to keep the young people in the house. It I imagine could be incredibly difficult. Do you have any advice for how to manage some of that?
But I think if there was some advice that I was going to give about how to have those conversations, there's 4 principles that you should use whenever you're trying to have a difficult conversation with somebody, and that includes your teenager. And the very first one is to be honest. And that principle means being honest about why those restrictions are there, why they're significant, why they're so important, that basically they're there to protect us, to protect life. And they're there because we're in a situation that literally no one on the planet has ever lived through before. The second point is empathy. So show some empathy for what young people are sacrificing, really. And what we know in terms of the statistics is that they're making those sacrifices for our older generations.
Yeah.
And that can feel really difficult for them as well, because it can feel like, well, they feel, when you're young, you feel invincible anyway. And so it's understandable that it's hard for them to see why they have to give up all of these things to protect us as a society. Next point is give them autonomy. And that's really hard in the current situation. Autonomy is about choice, and that's so important for teenagers. Teenagers are setting out on that journey to independence. They want to be able to make their own choices about their life. And in this situation, that's incredibly limited and restricted. So if your teenager needs some choice about how they're going to spend their day, what they're going to do within the restrictions that are on us, try and facilitate that. If they want to have a day where they're not doing online school, where they're staying on their PlayStation all day, these are the times to build some flexibility into that schedule, and even some routine to that choice is saying, look, this is your free day. Have these days a week where you can decide what you're going to do and how you're going to do it, but you've got to keep within the rules. And then the very last point is reflect. So try to listen to what your teenager is saying about how this situation is making them feel. Try and reflect some of that back to them so that you understand how they're feeling. To put all of that together, the 4 principles are: be honest, be empathic, give choice where you can. So respect your child's autonomy. And the last one is reflect what they're saying back to you. So they understand that you're listening.
What about for those parents when it's gone beyond that and they've got a teenager who is stomped out of the house and refused to put up with the rules anymore? How do parents deal with the crisis situation?
What we advise in our work with families is, rather than punishment, seek to establish what we call a pathway to repair, which is basically, how can you give your child a way to fix the thing that's wrong, the thing that's happened, the rule that they've broken. So there needs to be a way for your child to feel like, I can make this up to you somehow, I can get back on the right track, rather than feeling like I'm somebody for you to be ashamed of, or somebody who's let you down. That kind of labeling can just make the situation worse and make the child feel like, well, what's the point in behaving anyway? In some of our families, things have escalated to the point where the parent actually might feel frightened of their teenage child.
We do have a lot of families where there's adolescent or child to parent violence, particularly following domestic abuse that children and young people have witnessed. As you know, sometimes that can end up being played out in their own behaviours, replicating what they've seen. So yeah, in those circumstances, I imagine that taking this kind of quite challenging parental approach, where you are less about punishment and more about repairing the relationship, must be very difficult. What do we say to parents at times like that?
What we try and do when we're working with families is to institute a kind of reset button. So to set up two things. First off, a family contract, and we'll have a copy of this up on our website that people can access and have a look at. That's basically your principles as a family of how you're going to treat each other. And that includes everybody. So it's not just that, your teenager shouldn't shout at you. You shouldn't shout at them either. Yeah. And if you do, you need to apologize. And that's teaching them that that's the same thing you expect from them. And then the second principle, and we'll also put this resource up online, is to establish for everybody in the household what we would call a safe place of retreat. So this is really hard at the moment because your places to retreat are so much more limited. They're literally your four walls maybe. And that can be incredibly difficult. But what you're allowing is that if you're in an argument with your teenager or with your child and it's escalating, that they or you can decide this headed the wrong direction and we need to just pause and break. And whatever the situation is, we need to both have a breather and step away and go calm down. And it's important to talk about this with your child or your teenager before you're in the middle of an argument, so that they know, right, these are my places that I can go. So have a list of those things that are allowed within the current restrictions that they can draw on as that are okay, rather than feeling like the only solution to this is for me to run off and go to my friend's house and not come home all night.
So if people want to go to the website and download any of these resources, they are on there. So we've got the family contract on there, and we've got the Timeout resource that talks about how to appropriately take time out, take some calm time before you then come back and talk about the problem.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, I think the third point I would make is that, we know for families, really difficult to ask for help in any circumstance. And right now, we know people are doing that less and less. They don't feel services are as accessible because of all the restriction that's on us, sort of globally. But I would really encourage, if parents are struggling or they're having difficulty or they're wanting to put some of these measures in place and they're finding that hard, then that's the time to phone for some support, phone for some advice, and to catch that as early as rather than feeling like I need to wait until things are really, really bad before I speak to somebody.
I think that's a brilliant advice.